Missed an episode of your favorite podcast? Choose from over a decade of content in our archives, not just the latest episode. All free at gcnlive.com.
This is your call to action. Get prepared, America. Economy, survival, energy, disasters. This is USAPrepares.com. Informative radio, educational radio. Interact now by emailing instructor@usaprepares.com or text at 434-390-7953. Class, please take your seats. Now, your instructor, Vincent Finelli.
Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? You dial set correctly to USA Prepares. Thank you for being in class with us today. Jason is engineering the broadcast at Genesis Communications Network in Minnesota. I'm Vincent Finelli. Rich Scheben is with us. Welcome, Rich Scheben.
Well, thank you, Vincent Finelli. How are you this morning?
Well, interesting you asked. I'd like to just share with our class something that is happening. I believe that this is the biggest fraud, the biggest deception ever perpetrated on the American farmer. Class, what I'm about to tell you affects you indirectly, every one of you. And you're not going to believe this, but this is absolutely true, and I am at ground zero. I have been ensnared by this fraud, this deception. So here it is. I guess before I tell you this, I have to tell you a little bit about engine oil because this is all connected. So if you're wondering why there are no or very few older classic cars running around as there used to be, the answer is pretty simple. When you go to buy engine oil, it will have a service category, and it will begin with the letter S for gasoline engines. It will begin with the letter C for diesel engines. The S stands for spark, as in spark plugs. The C stands for compression, as in diesel engines do not have spark plugs. They ignite the fuel-air mixture based on the extreme temperature that's created by compressing the diesel fuel mist and air, and that's what causes the explosion, the extreme temperature caused by the compressing of the gas. I don't mean gasoline, I mean diesel fuel and air. So back in the 1920s, the automobile industry, the American Petroleum Institute, created service categories called, the first one was called SA. And so that was a universal standard that was applied to all brands of motor oil. So if you had up 1920s through a 1930 automobile, your oil would be graded SA on top of the can or on the side of the can or on the label. And that meant that it met certain standards for anti-wear, detergents, additives, etc. Then the next grade was SB, as in Spark B. SB was in use up until 1951. So if you had an old Model A or Model T, you could use SA. But then in 1930, it was improved. The oil was improved to SB, service category. And it was backward compatible. So you could use SB grade oil in SA engines. And then in 1967, it was upgraded, or I'm sorry, in 51, it was upgraded to SC, and then in 67, SD, and then SE, and in 1979, SF. And it's gone from SF to SG in 1988, and then SH in 1993, and in 1996, SJ, and in 2001, SL, 2004, SM, and 2011, SN, and then in 2018, SN+. Okay, that's for spark. That's for gasoline-type engines. Now, the reason I'm telling you that is what happened is in the later models of vehicles, the oil was changed. The additives were removed. Some of the additives were removed, like zinc and phosphorus and molybdenum disulfide. Those are extreme pressure anti-wear additives. And because of air pollution constraints by the government, those additives were reduced. So what happened is if you had an older engine, like in 1951 or 1960-something or 1970 engine, with a camshaft inside the engine, a flat tappet camshaft, the anti-wear additives were not included in the current production oils, and your engine would wear out very quickly, which explains why you don't see many of these older vehicles, because you can't get engine oil for them unless you buy racing oil. And most people don't know that these older cars, even though they're not racing them, need racing-grade oil, which is really expensive. So they put the current oil in because they were led to believe that you could have a newer service category oil, like, let's say SJ, used in an engine that required SD. But that's not the case. So what happened was there was extreme wear, and these engines wore out very quickly. And now you can't get the blocks. You can't get, because of cash for clunkers, it's really hard to find some of these engine blocks and parts and crankshafts and so forth. So we're seeing fewer and fewer of these classic and older cars. All right, that's the story about engine oil. Now, there's a story that's kind of like that, but way worse. And this is deceptive marketing practices and advertising by a company called Orscheln, O-R-S-C-H-E-L-N, O-R-S-C-H-E-L-N, and Citgo. And there was a bucket of 5 gallons of oil. It was a yellow bucket, and it was marketed as premium, let me say it a different way, premium 303 tractor hydraulic fluid. And what really happened is these lubricants were used by the American farmers, and we used them in older equipment that required certain additives. Well, the additives were absent from this oil, left out intentionally. And the oil that was used was substandard. And it's causing all kinds of problems for the American farmer. So, for example, hydraulic hoses were failing, bursting, leaking. O-rings failing, leaking. Hydraulic cylinders failing, leaking. Now, what does this mean to Vincent, Finelli, and family? Well, we've used lots of this, lots and lots of buckets of this. And this substandard oil has in the bucket sludge at the bottom of the bucket. So if you were to open the bucket with the pour spout, you can't really see the bottom of the oil in these buckets. But I have them. And I looked in them yesterday. There's sludge. And I'm talking about like 1/8 of an inch of sludge on the bottom of these 5-gallon buckets. It's visible to the eye. I've got lots of pictures of it. Well, we have lost hydraulic cylinders, power steering cylinders. They're like $500 a piece, minimum. So you lose power steering. We have lost power steering hoses. We have lost hydraulic cylinders that lift up the lift gate on balers. We've lost both of them on a John Deere baler that was perfectly good. I bought it new, take care of it, and I put this substandard oil in the tractor, which has the hydraulic pump that pumps the oil into the baler, and boom, it blew the hydraulic cylinders. Over $500 a piece, and it uses 2 of them. And it shuts you down. Absolutely cannot use your equipment when you have these hydraulic failures. So now I know that we drained out the oil in it took all day yesterday to drain the fluids and to try to get it out of the transmission and the rear end and the hydraulic system. We had to buy 2 hydraulic pumps. They're like thousands of dollars each. And they wear out because the lubricating qualities of the oils is absent by intention. So we're looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in replacement equipment if we had to buy all new equipment to replace all the damaged equipment from this substandard Citgo manufactured, sold by Orscheln Oil. When we drained out the oil out of the transmission, it looked like metallic paint. You know how metallic paint sparkles? That's because of all the small particles of metal that used to be shafts and bearings and gears in the transmission. Accelerated wear. We can't even keep our tractor in third gear now because it's worn out so much because of the lack of lubricating qualities. So I just wanted to share with you that I believe this is a massive, massive fraud against the American farmer. Now, what does that mean? Well, any farmer who has less than 1,000 acres is having a tough time to begin with. And we have less than 1,000 acres. We raise cows, but we depend on all of our equipment. Now, do you think the Finelli family is just itching to go to that John Deere dealer and say, listen, I'd like to pick up a couple of those brand new tractors you got, you know, the ones that require a computer to work on for $100,000 a piece. You think we're in the business of doing that? The answer is no. We cannot replace the equipment that has been damaged by this oil because there is no equipment as good for our application as what we have. There is no such thing. The new equipment is lighter, weaker, and requires computers to fix. Our equipment, I can fix. So now the American farmer is really, really in trouble because of what Citgo did. Now, did Orscheln know about it? I don't know. But did Orscheln test it? I don't know. Who else was involved? Walmart, Smitty's, and O'Reilly's. They all sold the same substandard oil that's causing damage to all the American farmers who've used it. And we've used hundreds of gallons of this stuff. I'm livid. I'm absolutely livid. And I'm making this statement because there are people who are listening. And get ready for this. And I'm talking about Orscheln and Citgo. Get ready for this. I have all the smoking guns. Not in my possession. Outside of my possession. But all the smoking guns. I've got the original fluid. I've got the original buckets. I've got the damaged tractors. I've got the damaged parts. I've got the receipts. And I've been talking about this for years, class. You've heard me. You've heard me over and over saying, we're having failures like crazy. I can't figure out what's going on. Why are these hoses breaking? Why are these hydraulic failures happening? It's because of Citgo and the resellers of this product. We'll be right back. So, class, the question I have to ask is this the intentional takedown of the American farmer? Is this the intentional takedown? So this class action suit that's going on right now has 6 counts. I'm going to read the counts. They're very short. Count number 1, Missouri Merchandising Practices Act violations. Count number 2, breach of express warranty. Count number 3, breach of implied warranty. Count number 4, fraud and misrepresentation. Count number 5, negligence. Count number 6, unjust enrichment. And what's happened is this lubrication, this quote lubrication product, unquote. The defendants, the 303 tractor hydraulic fluid is not appropriate for the use and did not meet the specifications as advertised, marketed, and sold, according to this suit. And it looks like I'm part of this suit. Imagine the farmer who's, is struggling along and his equipment is breaking down or her equipment is breaking down. And they go, gosh, it's so expensive. These hoses are, thousands of dollars in hydraulic hoses and thousands in hydraulic cylinders, and the transmission just broke, and that's $10,000 to fix the transmission. That's the kind of thing that we're talking about. Now, add that to the weather anomalies. It's taken down the American farmer. The little guys. Now, the big guys are okay because they're working with the government and they have these handouts, and they, guys with over 1,000 acres, they're a different classification. they have these government contracts that the small farmer doesn't have. So I just wanted to share that with the class. That could be the largest fraud against the American farmer ever perpetrated, and it could be the intentional takedown of the American small farmer that has less, or those with less than 1,000 acres. Rich Scheben, any comments before we continue?
Well, yeah. When you have gimmicks to break down forced disposability, forced obsolescence, to increase margin debt, to basically get rid of certain subsets, to benefit the aristocracy, basically the fascist system where the big corporate oligarchies are owning everything with the help of government lobbying and special interests, et cetera, et cetera. All they care about is looking at GDP, and even though that number is totally skewed and manipulated, just look at 20 to 25% of the GDP measurement is regarding sick people. Divorces and crime adds to GDP. So when you have these gimmicks, when you have distractions, when you have sabotage, creative accounting, you have very little legitimacy today. In fact, I've been reading that I don't know about most, but a lot of the new purchases for farmland and agriculture is now foreign-owned. And this is a very dangerous thing. So basically, we have our so-called leaders, the leaders that were in place before Donald Trump got here, basically kowtowing to the highest bidder. And not only does this eliminate jobs and create deflationary situations, this also makes it very difficult for the little guy to even find buyers, because there's such a big inequality difference between the super wealthy and everybody else. So a lot of people who want to even sell their farms and sell their small acreage are having a hard time to do it. Even banks don't even want to touch the lending of that anymore like they did back in the old days. So we can go off to many tangents, but that's my 2 cents on what you just said.
I appreciate that. Something that we didn't talk about that we should probably talk about happened overnight. Plus, I know you've heard me talk about the sink gurgling, high pressure, low pressure changes, and rapid changes in atmospheric pressure. More than 5 million people are left without power across Ohio last night. 51 tornadoes touched down overnight across 8 states. Absolutely extreme damage. We'll be right back. Class, this is exactly why we do what we do. 2 hours a day, 5 days a week, teach you how to be prepared. Headlines, dailymail.co.uk. More than 5 million are left without power across Ohio after rapid-fire tornadoes ripped roofs from homes. 51 twisters touching down across 8 states overnight. Tornadoes first touched down in the city of Trotwood, just outside of Dayton, about 11 p.m. on Monday night. National Weather Service described tornado as extremely dangerous and told residents to remain in shelters. There was widespread destruction and damage, buildings down, power lines, tossed cars, trucks. Houses were cut in half. Barns were completely flattened. 5 million people are without power in Ohio alone, according to the local authorities, from these 51 tornadoes that touched down over 8 states. Those states are Idaho, Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. One more time. Idaho, Colorado, Nebraska, Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio. And those states are still not in the clear yet, because the weather forecast has continued to, they have this severe weather forecast throughout today and Wednesday. The highway department had to use snowplows to clear the debris, because the debris across the roads was so thick, and including Interstate 75, they had to use snowplows to clear the roads from the debris. Again, 5 million without power in Ohio alone. We don't know about the injuries yet, and we don't know about deaths yet, but apartment buildings had brick peeled off the sides, roofs peeled off, trees broken like toothpicks. Unbelievable damage. In Dayton, the Dayton Power and Light Company reported that 64,000 of its customers were without power. It's even worse than that, because the water and sewage treatment plants are without water in Dayton. That's a pretty big problem. So that means that you won't have water and you won't have sewage treatment. For sure. I'm sure there are people who are trapped in rubble. I don't know where they are. I can't help them because I'm so far away. But I've been to Joplin, and I've seen the devastation of what a tornado can do. And back when I went to Joplin the day after that tornado, there was a woman who was just pulled out of a hole. She jumped into a hole for safety, and she was elderly, jumped into this, well, maybe climbed into the hole, and the tornado was throwing all kinds of debris in the air, and she was safe from that until a sheet of steel landed on top of the hole. And then the rain came and started flooding the hole, and she couldn't get out. She just got out. She was up to her neck in water. Just got out. Some non-governmental types decided they were going to help and pulled her out. Yeah. And when I was there as a Red Cross volunteer, the Red Cross told me, you cannot go. You cannot go. We're not taking volunteers to go to Joplin. I went anyway. And there were signs on plywood, spray painted, please help, please help, please help. And yet the Red Cross wasn't sending any volunteers. People were just stunned. They were looking at, I talked to a guy who was looking at this concrete pad, 24 by 24. It was like swept clean. He said, my garage used to be here. There was nothing there. It was like it was just poured concrete, nothing on it. Like it was all ready to set up a basketball hoop. Nothing was on it. Power lines are down here, and as a result, this is really, really serious, extreme damage. And class, you need to be prepared. Don't take anything for granted. Don't think that tomorrow, I can wait till tomorrow. We'll go buy whatever we need tomorrow. It's okay. There may not be that tomorrow that's okay. I'm not kidding. Rich Scheben, your thoughts?
Well, that's what we do. We talk about financial, economic, social, and political rationale. We talk about political correctness. We talk about gardening. We talk about raising animals and hunting and fishing and butchering and living off-grid. You know, that's basically, we try to give information to the people so they can create ideas and solutions that might be according to their particular situation. And a lot of things can affect their situation. It could be debt, savings, health, cash flow, opportunities, like nepotism, what group you're in. Unfortunately, skill sets, proven results, and qualifications don't mean as much anymore. You got to think about your pension, the gig economy, time leverage regarding your youth, especially for money, and creating asset growth in principle for their equities. You know, today people have to worry about things like addictions to video games, television, smartphones. The older people have not done a good enough job to create discipline and tough love to the young people to make them, force them to create a balance between technology and nature. And this makes them easily manipulated and easily turned into followers and not thinkers. And I see a lot of people also thinking, voting with their feet, adapting to Plan Bs. But what I fear is that if we have socialism or no jail time for the highest people who was involved in this Spygate catastrophe, then I think the little people will lose in America forever. And I think time is dwindling, and this is why we, as a people, need to talk about Plan Bs, and need to come together and need to help one another, because we are in unprecedented territory. This has been, where we are in history has been not written yet. And this is why we have to try to control our own destiny. Vince?
Yeah, and in this particular series of 51 tornadoes overnight, there are people who were in their homes and the windows blew out. So they got down on their hands and knees or on their bellies and covered their heads, and the windows blew out, and debris from the tornadoes was blowing through their houses. Can you imagine that? Class, think about that. There are flying 2x4s. There are flying garbage cans. There are flying flower pots. Everything, chairs, steel lawn chairs, garden furniture. I mean, all kinds of things were flying through the air, including roofs. Power poles were split, cut in half. I was looking at some images of this, and you couldn't even walk across the street. There was so much debris. Impossible. If you had boots on, thick-soled boots, you still couldn't walk across the street because of the nails and the glass and the other debris and the power lines. This is going to be a mess to clean up. And think about this. So think about, you decide to have your bathroom remodeled. And you call around for someone to remodel your bathroom. So you make 4 or 5 or 6 phone calls. And you hear, we're kind of tied up. We can probably get to it next month. We don't even know when we can get to it. You get answers like that. Okay? Now imagine, and that's in the good times. That's before the tornadoes. Now imagine these 51 tornadoes, and then you want to have your house rebuilt. Where is the skilled labor going to come from? Where are the 2x4s, 2x6s, 2x8s, 2x10s, 2x12s, plywood, OSB, counters, sinks, pipe, wire, switches, staircases? Where is concrete? Where is all of that going to come from when the infrastructure is battered down and the power's down? Where's it going to come from? You just go to Home Depot and buy all that stuff? How are they going to even process your order with the electricity down? How's Lowe's going to do it? How's Walmart going to do it? Let's say you want to rent a car. Where's that going to come from? It's going to come from outside that area, right? And it's going to have to be trucked in. But that's going to have to be after the snowplows clear the streets from the debris. And the wires are moved from the roads that are still hot. I'm talking about the power lines. And the water drains. And let's say you just have to go to the bathroom now. How are you going to do that? It's really serious.
Well, Vince, for the poorer folks, we've talked about this before several months ago, like when we were talking about people living in Tornado Alley who live in trailer parks and such. If you don't have a basement where you can run down and for safety for tornadoes, I really recommend, spending a little money, instead of doing a remodel, spend a little money and buy a septic tank and just bury it just below the surface. And this way you and your family have a place to run to, at least for the few minutes while a tornado goes over your head, and can save your life. So when you talk about, 2x4s and nails and all this stuff flying through the air, at least it can offer a life-saving value to those people. And even if a tornado doesn't happen, I think if you sell your property and you tell your new buyer that you have this unused, brand-new septic buried just for safety against tornadoes, I think it helps the selling value. And people like it when you move to a property where people have plan Bs and think that way. And I think it's more valuable to prospective buyers, Vince.
And what you're saying is you don't have to buy a $6,000 storm shelter made out of concrete when you can buy a $1,500 or $1,000 septic system that's brand new and have a backhoe come in for $300 and set it for you and put a door in it. Yeah. Or buy a container, a 20-foot container, and bury 7/8 of it and leave a hatch to jump in. That's got the latest update. So now it's 51 tornadoes. Some say 52. And one person has died. 35 more are injured and in hospitals. Actual condition is unknown. We'll probably learn of more deaths as we sift through the rubble. So, class, think about this. No electricity. No gasoline. No food. No water treatment. No sewage treatment. Which ones of your neighbors would be able to help you in this kind of a situation when you're all in the same boat? Who's going to help you? You're on your own. You are really on your own. I am not exaggerating. No one's coming to help you. Not in the early stages of this. The government's still scratching their heads wondering what happened. So, what do? You get out of the way. You get out of the way. You move. You say, I really love that job where I hate my boss and I hate the customers and everybody's mean to me. But you live there anyway. Why? Because, your family lives there. And no one moves until someone moves. So no one moves. So you're all stuck there because you love your relatives that you can't stand going to a barbecue with once a year. Think about that. Am I exaggerating? No, I'm not. So, if you want to be a victim, just stay in those areas. So where do you go? I believe, now I can't prove this, but I believe that if you live in really densely wooded areas, you have less probability of tornadoes. And if you live in land that slopes, you've got a great place for the water to run, and that's downhill. So don't build your house at the bottom of the hill. Build your house near the top of the hill, where there's plenty of woods, and there are less tornadoes, fewer tornadoes. Of course, when you do that, there'll be less potential for income because you won't be cleaning each other's houses and flipping each other's burgers because there are fewer people to do that for. So you're going to have to figure out something else unless you're retired and on Social Security. So you can move to a lower cost of living area and ride out this mess that we're seeing more often and more often and more often. That's what I've done. I saw this coming years ago. I built the strongest house I could. But you know what? Rethinking it and seeing the devastation, I would build a basement house. Our next house will be a basement house. That's a house that's mostly underground. The roof is soil and grass, and you water your roof. So it grows, and you mow your roof. And you have some southern-facing glass to warm your house in the winter and for light. But the rest of the house is 3 sides is underground. Think about that. That's the way to go. Absolutely the way to go. And so when you have these tornadoes, you go into the concrete portion of the house that's concrete on 4 sides, including the roof. And you ride it out. Those are my thoughts. Of course, you need a generator, and you need your own water supply, and you need a generator, your own water supply, you need your own septic system. You need everything. You need everything. You need to be able to grow your own food, cook your own food, can your own food, dehydrate your own food. You need to do all that stuff. You need to know everything about everything. Fix your own cars. So how are you going to get your oil changed in Dayton, Ohio? for the next few weeks, maybe a month. How could you do that? Rich Scheben, before we go into top of the hour break, any comments?
Well, I'll make the comments on the other side because I hear the music going, so I will do my thing on the second hour, Vince.
Yeah. And I'm just going to sit back and relax and enjoy the class. Rich, it's really serious. It's really serious. Everything stopped last night for these people who experienced these 51 or 52 tornadoes. Everything stopped. It's not the same today. It's a whole different world for them. I'm sorry to say that. We'll be back after top of the hour news and commercial announcements. Everyone all set? Cocked? Locked? Here we go. Hour number 2 of USA Prepares. We've been talking about the 51 or 52 tornadoes across 8 states. 1 death. At least 35 people are in the hospital right now with injuries. Some of them minor, not all of them minor. And 5 million people in Ohio are without electricity. Very, very serious situation. And class, what would you do? What would you do? There's nobody to call. Think about it. Just think about this for a second. What do you think the government of these cities is doing right now? Do you think that they are prepared for a total wipeout? Do you think that these brilliant people that are hired by your tax dollars to protect you, do you think they have a clue as to what to do next? Do you think they do? Their buildings are damaged, their equipment's damaged, the electricity's down, the water's not working, the sewer's not working, the roads are plugged up with debris. They use electricity to pump fuel to go into these pieces of equipment. It's all damaged. Do you think that they're ready? Hey, we got a plan. We've been preparing for a total wipeout of Dayton, Ohio since day one. Do you really think they have? Or do you think they've been saying, what would we do if we lost 5% of Dayton? How would we cope with that? Not a total wipeout like they've experienced. Rich Scheben, your thoughts?
Well, it's just like what's been happening over the last couple of years with floods and mudslides and tornadoes and hurricanes. And I think government entities are looking at it like, hey, we have a chance to print more money and raise GDP. I know that sounds terrible, but that's how a lot of government workers think because they care more about their jobs, benefits, and pension plans than they really care about the people. And so, when you really think that we control our own destiny, whether it be weather, whether it be Murphy's Law, certain circumstances, economies, there's 4 articles right here. Time makes up Trump quote. Liberal media amplifies fake news. Next article. CBS encourages physical assault against conservatives on eve of EU election. Next article. Uncovered FBI chart could send Hillary straight to jail, which basically implies that the FBI knew about this chart. Next article, only 2% of Amazon shareholders vote against giving facial recognition. That's analogous to 96% of Monsanto shareholders withdrawing the information about what's in GMO food. You see, folks, and when it comes to stocks and shareholders, basically the top 7 to 10% pretty much own everything. So it's not about facts. It's not about truth. It's not about helping the people. It's about controlling the masses and deceiving them. And this is why we need to prepare. This is why we need to think outside the box. During the top of the hour break, I went over to my garden and opened up my greenhouse's doors because it was getting a little hot outside. If we start thinking differently, and using basically the old 19th century skills that most of us have forgotten, but dovetailing them with 21st century technology, I think, and when I say basics, I mean like food, water, shelter. We need to go back for the bottom 93% of income earners. We need to go back to that methodology. We need to, I'm not saying it's not a bad idea to think with foresight and to think about new technology, but we can't throw out the old ways because we're losing our preparation, and the powers that be are, just like these 4 articles, are gaining manipulation, especially with robotics, automation, artificial intelligence taking our jobs. Vince?
Okay, and I agree. And Miles and I had an off-air discussion recently about technology. And we were talking about Mercedes-Benz technology. And he says Mercedes is really, really reluctant to give up old technologies because it works. So replacing old technology with new technology just because it's new is insane, especially if you have proven track record of old technology. So let's continue this little bit of this theme that we talked about, things that go wrong. So in Oklahoma, Hunter, Oklahoma, to be exact, the authorities are trying to figure out what happened that caused a turbine on a wind farm to buckle and collapse. Now, I'm talking about one of these great big turbines, not little turbines like we might have here at the farm. I'm talking about these great big ones. Well, there was a 40-mile-an-hour wind, and this General Electric-made wind turbine collapsed. 40-mile-an-hour wind. Now, we're not talking about tornadoes here. We're talking about just a strong wind. Boom. Now, imagine what happened. Was there a failure of the welds? Was there a failure of the design? What went wrong? They still haven't reported what went wrong. But this great big tube, this huge tube that you couldn't put your arms around if you had to, buckled, just broke under a 40-mile-an-hour wind. So let's say you were near there. Let's say there was a tornado, not just 40-mile-an-hour wind, a strong tornado, and this wind farm comes apart, and then the pieces go flying. Think of the destruction. Think about, what did they do? Did they shut down the entire wind farm because this one buckled? Did they think, maybe we ought to put the brakes on so that the rest of them don't buckle? We have engineered ourselves into a pretty serious corner that is really difficult to get out of. We're so dependent on electricity, we got to have it. We're addicted to it. We're so addicted to it that the 51 or 52 tornadoes that caused the damage, we can't fix that damage without electricity. We can't fix it without fossil fuels either. So without diesel and gasoline and electricity, there's no fixing anything that happened last night. Nothing. We can't even flush our toilets without electricity. The sewage treatment plants are down because the electricity's down. So think about that when you're flipping each other's burgers. You need to learn new skills right now. Actually, you're pretty late to the party. But you ought to do it. You ought to learn your new skills. If you haven't been paying attention, you ought to start right now, in earnest, preparing for whatever's going to happen. Because these tornadoes have damaged infrastructure, they've damaged the food supply, they've damaged equipment. The food supply is really in trouble because of all the flooding that's been happening. China has 200 million pigs that are diseased. They're going to have to kill them. 200 million. We, the United States, can't raise 200 million pigs in a year. We can't do it. We don't have the capacity to replace the pigs that China is probably going to kill soon. Not for food, but because of disease. So the corn belt, the wheat belt, they're in trouble. So expect prices to go way up, because other countries are going to want our food, and we want it too. So where does it go? It goes to the highest bidder. That means prices are going to go up. Correct me if I'm wrong, Rich Scheben. Did I say that right?
Well, is this an inroad for me to talk about deflation and inflation? I know we have a tendency to go off tangents. Okay, super. I'm going to take the ball and run with it then, okay? I'm going to have to shortcut a few things because of the lack of time, but I'm going to do my best, okay? So people think that, now, regarding what you said about food, I'm reading that food has actually been inflated by 40%. There's a government price, and then there's the real world price. and because of big corporate oligarchies taking over the farms and foreign ownership, there's no bigger reason why everybody should not be getting together with family and friends to buy a hobby farm so they can create raised beds and greenhouses, grow their own food, raise their own animals, maybe learn about hunting and fishing, and look at the damages of GMO and hormones, steroids, and antibiotics and pesticide-fed everything. I think we need to start thinking about this. Now, regarding deflation and inflation, people think that deflation prices are going down, inflation prices are going up. That's how most people define it. There's a lot more to that, and I'm going to get into that. It depends on so many criteria and variables. And I always say beware of the soft data, even beware of the hard data. Preparing folks is not just all the things we talk about regarding the farm. It's also being fluent in at least economic 101 analysis, so you know what's happening and how to affect it. Now, you've heard me before, for you present listeners, that I usually blame our present situation that we're going into regarding demographics, central bank corrupt monetary policies, Keynesian economics, and group identity politics. And that is absolutely the case. Now, regarding deflation, I'm going to basically go off, I'm going to digress into a couple of tangents here to put as much in perspective as possible, give you as much definition, information, so you can make your own judgment and hopefully do some research on your own. So deflation is a combination of the following, or usually is. First of all, regarding demographics, fertility rates are down, population is aging, the politically correct elite obviously want a population decrease. Okay, they're saying that almost 8 billion people on the planet is too much. I'm not here to argue that. I'm just telling you what their message is, whether it's overt, subliminal, it doesn't matter. Deflation also means a reduction in demand, lowering prices, lowering wages, a drop in spending, cutting prices, reduction of the velocity of money, postponing buying because of a hope of lower prices, which typically brings recessions or depressions, rising unemployment, increased debt, lower savings, lower credit, and of course, lower money supply. Now, obviously, I'm going to need more time. I'll need probably the rest of the show to put things in perspective. Please stay with us. I'll talk to you on the other side.
Class, during the break, I just got off the phone. I was able to get in touch with Bruce Kay. Bruce Kay is a USA Preparedness instructor in Ohio. He had a greenhouse that blew down. It's a hoop house, 31 feet by 72 feet, blew down, destroyed. Just got off the phone with him. Very quickly, Bob in Michigan, we're running short on time. Go. Bob in Michigan, are you there? We got to go really quickly. Rich Sheben's got a lot on today's Blackboard.
Yeah, well, I just going to talk about, we don't get that many tornadoes here in Michigan. In fact, the average is like 15 a year, and mostly in the southern part of the state. In fact, I was just looking up statistics on tornadoes in the country here online, and it shows that they're on the increase.
Absolutely. Is that what you want to talk about, tornadoes today?
Yeah, here in Michigan.
I'll tell you what, let's do that. Tell you what, give us a call on Friday, first hour. Friday, first hour, I'll dedicate to tornadoes, okay?
Okay.
Hey, thanks so much, Bob. Thank you.
Yep. Bye.
Bye. Okay, Rich Scheben.
All right. Going back to deflation and inflation, and I also want to mention, I'm trying to think where I left off. I think I was talking about the decrease in money supply was the last criteria of the combination of deflationary things that were happening. Now, if you recall the last Great Depression in 1929, decrease in money supply was a big factor, along with the Rothschild Bank going down interest rates being raised into a recession, and silver manipulation. It was a chain reaction. So we have to remember that a collapse is a process and not necessarily one event. So our big question is, are we going to have a soft landing? Or is everything going to continue to be papered over like all the bubbles that's happening right now? Now, when you have other things that affect commerce, no rule of law, only what group you're from, oil prices. Okay, let me just give you an example. I'm going to go off into one of my tangents here. Oil prices, or oil spiking, usually precedes recessions. Now, we all know that oil has been going up, Brent and crude a little bit, had a little dip lately, but it's been going up. So we have to watch for false flags. We have to watch for the warmongers, the military industrial complex, and the bankers. We have to watch for the drones blowing up barges and oil pipelines like we've recently seen, Soil selling their companies, oil refinery updates, inventory sell-offs, slow inventory buildups. There's so many. What I'm getting at, this could be an analogy for so many different things, because so many people waste time. Is this inflation? Is this deflation? Now, I'm going to go to inflation right now after that brief introduction to deflation, and then I'm going to go back into deflation and talk about a lot of the variables that's sending us to a deflationary, stagflationary environment. Now, consumer confidence about the future or loss of it is typically very inflationary, especially if there's confidence issues regarding the dollar. Now, the good news for the U.S. dollar is when you look at international trade and commerce, the dollar, our dollar, because of the world reserve currency status, and it all depends on if we lose that in the near future, right now we're 60% plus of international commerce. But what I think is going to happen, besides this deflationary, stagflationary, we're also going to have a hybrid disaster with inflation in some arenas. Now, I've talked about what's happening with inflation regarding the inflation chart, which came out a few months ago, where healthcare, college, and car insurance were in those categories were in the top 6. That's because of the money printing, the subsidies, the special interest groups, the lobbying, the PACs, that basically goes against the little guy. It's the big corporations that get covered, basically get their back covered. So when you look at these variables, healthcare, college, and car insurance, they're basically subsidized through cost shifting. And I'll talk about that briefly when we get back after the break.
Rich Scheben, offgridmontana.com. Offgridmontana.com. Okay, Rich Scheben, please continue.
All right, Vince, thank you. I'm going to talk a little bit about Keynesian economics and inflation because they are really connected at the hip and they go hand in hand to basically foment the corruption and manipulation behind the scenes against the little people and the funneling of money to the wealthy. First of all, Keynesian economics and the Fed, or central banks in general, their model depends on population growth. Obviously, that's really not happening. When you look at global growth, basically around 1990 is when it started to decline. And the only countries that are really growing is a few countries in Africa and 1 or 2 in the Middle East. So that's just the math. And when you look at Keynesian economics, that leads to government demands of austerity in general, when you look at even the free world, and not free markets and supply and demand. So it's all creative accounting. And I talked about the inflationary pressures, about the inflation chart that I mentioned earlier, healthcare, college, and car insurance. Well, healthcare, people, when you have 40 million illegal immigrants in your country and they can walk into an ER and get free healthcare or get free college or at least residential tuition, or they don't have to pay for car insurance when they're driving around on roads, they get into an accident. All that cost shifting becomes a burden on the people. And that's what's happening in America today. So the cost shifting is taking money out of the American pockets. Now, Keynesian economics has certain beliefs, certain ideologies, if you will. One of them is that they believe they can create a strong economy by changing or increasing the amount of money supply. Now, that's no real wealth exchange. So when in doubt, inflate only hurts the little people and helps the big people. Now, when they say deficits don't matter and GDP creates happiness, that's a bunch of hooey. It's basically elite interventionism where they say print, inflate, buy now, and pay later. In fact, Keynesian teachings even allow governments to shift asset and liability columns. That's nothing more than creative accounting and manipulation. So when you look at the fact that inflation, which when you talk about austerity, I'm just shortcutting here, folks. I just don't have a lot of time. Austerity for the little people creates illusions of wealth, but it really turns into confiscation. So when you look at the money supply that's grown probably close to 20 times versus the working population, which has grown one time, there's a total disassociation of money creation from population growth to substitute a flood of manufactured liquidity for waning demand. So inflation can even have waning demand and forcing prices higher despite decelerating growth in demand. So they can literally create a connection between the inflation and the centralized top-down control of the state or by the state for certain special privileges and certain people and certain groups. It's a total smoke and mirror thing. So inflation is also increasing the money supply, like I just mentioned, inflating dollar supply basically out of the blue. You always hear the term, printing money out of thin air. That's exactly what's happening. But there's consequences because the value and the perception of the medium of exchange for something by what? And that's the big question that people are asking today. So it brings down consumer confidence, and with Keynesian economics and the political correctness of group identity politics, where certain people feel entitled to play the victim group status card, which makes them lower demand the bars of standards and expectations to be lowered so they feel they can get a job, is not for prosperity or equality or fairness. It's a tool by the elite to divide and conquer the people. So we start talking about what is the value and wealth distribution from producers to the wealthy money printers, a.k.a. the rich. Now, money out of thin air from the central banks, can be several things. It could be quantitative easing. And we've talked about this in great detail. The great majority of the people who get free money from the printing of money are the elite. Basically, the top 2% get probably 98% of the QE. And it could go to bailouts, too big to fails, too big to jails, could be banks, could be Wall Street. These are the people who get money when the Federal Reserve and Treasury does these schemes. Another example of money out of thin air is fractional reserve lending. And we've talked about this in detail, but because of time, I'm just going to give a one-sentence definition. It's basically banks lending more money than they have in their stockpile. And, of course, stock buybacks. We've talked about this in a lot of detail as well. Stock buybacks basically, it's money, often selling bonds or debt money, not for expansion, new products or services or people, but to boost earnings per share. So the new debt with share buybacks, dividends to the wealthy shareholders, executive cash through cashing in stock options, and of course acquisitions and mergers, which usually means consolidation and robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence taking more jobs. Now, when you talk about words like expansion and less people, that sounds deflationary. When you talk about less new products, in the beginning, it's going to be inflationary because there's the same amount of money chasing less goods. And this is why I said that little disclaimer, if you will, in the beginning, that we have a hybrid disaster where we're going to end up in a deflationary, stagflationary situation with inflation on certain areas because of the government and big oligarchy fascist protections that they get with special interests and subsidies and lobbying, etc. So basically what money out of thin air is, fractional reserve lending and stock buybacks, these are just examples of welfare for the rich. So the wealthy have golden parachutes at every corner, paid for, whether it be through cost shifting or all the other means I've mentioned on the air. It basically turns out to be welfare for the super wealthy. So now we're talking about a deflationary results because of these things. Lowering the bars of standards for printing money, getting jobs based on what group you're in, group identity politics. In other words, what's your skin pigmentation shade, what's your gender, what gender are you identifying at, what's your religion, what's your sexual orientation. This is where we're going. This is all extremely deflationary because it disincentivizes working value. The whole process is losing credibility. So consequently, you're going to have increased bankruptcies, defaults, delinquencies, especially at the end of an economic cycle where wealth inequality and debt is off the charts. So when I talk about this deflation, this then leads to less lending, which we can see that happening in the bank system today. We can also see housing, auto, and finance jobs going down. Now, the Fed creates currency. They buy treasury bonds. They put money into the stock market, which is all fake and phony. It's not for markets of supply and demand. Or they lower interest rates, which in the situation they're now, they have to lower interest rates. Well, guess what happens when they lower interest rates? People buy more houses and more stuff. But as more and more people, because of this whole process I'm talking about, have less money, more debt, less savings, that process, even with more money printing, which only goes through the elite, does not go into the system. So when we have less lending, this creates a decrease in money supply. And that even occurs when loans are repaid, but they're not being recreated because this deflationary spiral. This deflates bubbles coming from cheap, non-legitimate money printing and money creation, and money shuffling and creative accounting for non-productive, non-earning purposes. And these activities basically discredits the whole system. And this is what Donald Trump inherited. This is why you always hear me saying how he inherited sabotage and demolition. Donald Trump inherited a disaster. He talked about the debt, the demographics, the credit, the pensions, evaluations, and all the headwinds of future rates of growth with these unsustainable bubbles when he was a candidate. And now when you look at the debt of global corporations, household government promises, the solvency, liquidity issues, heck, we don't even know what definitions are anymore. What are earnings? What are markets, fundamentals? What's liquidity, solvency mean anymore? What's fair value? What's leverage? Valuation of PEs, price-to-sales ratios, GDP, credit, debt, core business of corporations, money printing, free markets, supply and demand, the velocity of money, profits in general. Nothing, every definition is being changed. It's being diluted for the purpose of basically casting shadows over the corruption that's been happening. So we got to look at, are we ever going to become a manufacturing powerhouse again? When I look at productivity and I look at the behaviors out there, I look at the work ethics, I look at the lack of savings, and of course the debt at all levels, I don't see it. Now, 80% of people live in the paycheck to paycheck. In the last 2 months, they've changed that. They're saying now they're pushing this narrative hard. Oh, only 50% of people live paycheck to paycheck. This is what they do. Their job is to manufacture perception, pity, guilt, and ideology. The mainstream media, their job is to act, theater, sway public opinion, hold on to the narratives. That's how they divide the American people. They use Hegelian and dialectic, media propaganda, professional wordsmithing, subliminal messaging. This is what they do. And this is why we need to prepare. Now, and I hear more music coming, I will wrap it up with some shortcuts on last segment, folks. I'll try to be as brief as possible. Thanks, Vince.
Sure. And about 100% of the people I know live paycheck to paycheck. We'll be right back. Rich Sheben's in the front of the class. Rich, I'm just going to sit back in my seat and listen. Please continue.
All right, Vince, thank you. I'm going to be as brief as possible because we only have a couple minutes left. Basically, I left off, I'm talking about deflationary results. And when you have low interest rates since the low 80s, basically a bull bond market. We've talked about percentage rates many times, or interest rates, yields, if you will. They're a function of growth, wages, and inflation. Now, even though I've talked about how inflation in some areas because of subsidies, fascism, lobbyists, special interests, are certain industries are being protected, we are definitely in a deflationary, stagflationary environment with inflationary situations in some arenas. So that being said, there's also, you got to look at the dollar value, what's going to happen to it, how long is it going to stay up compared to, now, we always hear how we're the cleanest shirt in a dirty laundry, we're the prettiest house in a bad neighborhood. We don't know what's going to happen because we're not the insiders. We don't get the corrupt information. When are we going to lose the world reserve currency status? Is everybody going to sell their treasuries at one time? There's 2 or 3 times the amount of U.S. dollars abroad than in the United States. If that all comes back at one time, that's an inflationary situation. And look at the yield curve inversions. We've talked about that in great detail. You got to look at the CPI/inflation, unemployment, GDP. All these numbers are recalculated with different units of measures. Nobody believes we're at the lowest unemployment ever when you have 100 million people out of work. Come on. I mean, this is Twilight Zone crap. So we're in uncharted territory, especially with corporate debt. And those of you, if you heard me about a month or so ago, I talked about how corporate debt is more than double what the housing crisis, subprime mortgage catastrophe did to the 2008 crash. We are more than double that with debt regarding corporate debt. So what's keeping us afloat? I don't know. It's a lot of papering over everything. Definitions don't even mean anything. Facts and truths don't mean everything. People, I see the biggest jobs going to the companies and individuals who's willing to censor and surveil the American people. I see the biggest money going to people who's willing to distract, dumb down, and divide the American people by groups. And of course, we can't stop mentioning robotics, automation, artificial intelligence taking the jobs. So when you look at the pensions funds, when you look at all these people chasing yields and taking out, basically zombie companies and junk bonds, if the powers that be inflate, I'll tell you right now, if they go to total inflation or total hyperinflation and they inflate the dollar just to protect these super wealthy people, whether they be their pension funds, whether it be stock buybacks, whether it be creating money out of thin air, whether it be blowing out of the banks, if they do that, forget about it. The little guy's done. All over. Dreams, goals, quality of life, done. So we have to look at how even today money printing has less effect. Every time they print money by the charts, and pardon me, I'm just hitting hot buttons right now because of time. Every time we print more money has less effect, especially for the little people, because all that quantitative easing, all that new money has never been evenly distributed to the little people. the bottom 93% doesn't get representation unless you're part of a certain group so they can use divide and conquer strategies and poison us against ourselves. So the big question I'm going to leave you with, since we're probably have a matter of seconds left, is how to prosper, how to create wealth. What is sound money? How do you save? One of the things you have to do is become debt-free, especially in a corrupt, illegitimate, commerce for group-only world. Vince?
Well, I was just thinking about what you were saying, and you're absolutely right. So the biggest companies that make money right now are AT&T, Verizon, Facebook, Google, and Apple. And what do they make their money on? Monitoring our communications, voice, data, text, tweets, phone calls, and what happens in the bedroom. That's who makes the money. That's sick. What about washing machines, dryers, and cars, and the rest of it? Rich, thanks so much for being with us today.